What if one of the greatest cities ever built, bigger than London, bigger than Paris, more advanced than almost anything in Europe, was sitting on an island in the middle of a lake, and almost nobody in the outside world knew it existed? That was Tenochtitlan, and the people who built it started with nothing. They called themselves the Mexica, and before they were emperors, before the temples and the gold and the rivers of blood, they were wanderers, a despised, homeless people drifting through central Mexico with nothing but a prophecy and a god of war whispering in their ears. Their god, Huitzilopochtli, told them to keep moving until they found a sign: an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a serpent. When they found it, they would build their empire. But the Valley of Mexico they wandered into was no empty frontier. It was already packed with powerful city-states, descendants of civilizations like Teotihuacán and the Toltecs that had dominated the region for centuries. Nobody wanted the Mexica there. They were pushed from settlement to settlement, used as mercenaries, treated as outsiders. For generations, they survived on the margins, fighting other people's wars, marrying into noble bloodlines for legitimacy, and waiting. Then, around 1325, they found their sign on a swampy, mosquito-ridden island in the middle of Lake Texcoco. It was the last place anyone would choose to build a city, so naturally, they built one of the greatest cities in human history. They called it Tenochtitlan, and what they did with that island was staggering. They engineered chinampas, floating gardens made from layered mud and vegetation, turning the shallow lakebed into some of the most productive farmland in the Americas. They built causeways connecting the island to the mainland, aqueducts carrying fresh water from miles away, and dike systems that controlled flooding across the entire lake. Within 2 centuries, a swamp became a metropolis. But building a great city and ruling an empire are 2 different things. For their first 100 years, the Mexica answered to the Tepanecs of Azcapotzalco, the real power on the lake's western shore. That changed in 1428. The Mexica ruler Itzcoatl, along with his ruthless advisor Tlacaelel, allied with the cities of Texcoco and Tlacopan, and overthrew the Tepanecs in a sudden, violent uprising. The Triple Alliance was born, and Tenochtitlan was about to take over. One of the first things they did? They burned the old history books, literally. Tlacaelel ordered the codices of conquered peoples destroyed and replaced with new ones that recast the Mexica as chosen by the gods, destined to rule. It was one of the most deliberate acts of historical propaganda the ancient world ever saw, and it worked. Montezuma I pushed the empire's borders to the Gulf Coast, into Oaxaca, and toward the Pacific. Conquered peoples kept their own rulers, but they paid in food, textiles, gold, jade, feathers, cacao, and human beings. Because at the center of the Aztec world was a belief that terrified their neighbors and baffled the Europeans who would eventually arrive. The gods needed human blood to keep the sun alive. Without sacrifice, the 5th sun, the current age of the world, would end in catastrophic earthquakes. So the empire fed the temples, and the temples fed the sky. By the time Montezuma II took power in 1502, Tenochtitlan was home to as many as 300,000 people. The Templo Mayor towered over the city center. The market at Tlatelolco drew 60,000 visitors a day. Society ran on strict hierarchy. Nobles, commoners, slaves, but a warrior who proved himself in battle could rise through the ranks. Education was mandatory. Poetry and philosophy flourished. Nahuatl, their language, was spoken across central Mexico. From the outside, the empire looked unstoppable. From the inside, it was held together with fear. Conquered peoples didn't assimilate. They endured. They paid their tribute, watched their sons dragged to the sacrificial stone, and waited for a chance to break free. States like Tlaxcala had fought the Aztecs for decades and never submitted. That resentment was a crack running through the foundation of everything the Mexica had built. And in 1519, someone walked right into it. Hernán Cortés landed on the Gulf Coast with about 500 men, 16 horses, and a handful of cannons. It was an absurdly small force. But Cortés didn't need to defeat the Aztec Empire alone. He just needed to turn it against itself. Within weeks, he was forging alliances with every enemy the Aztecs had ever made. The Tlaxcalans alone would eventually send tens of thousands of warriors to fight alongside him. Montezuma II chose diplomacy. He sent gifts, he sent warnings, and then, fatally, he let the Spaniards walk into Tenochtitlan. By November 1519, Cortés was inside the capital, and he promptly took the emperor hostage in his own palace. It couldn't last. When a Spanish officer massacred hundreds of Aztec nobles during a religious ceremony, the city erupted. Montezuma was killed, likely stoned by his own people. The Spaniards were driven out in a bloody retreat on La Noche Triste, losing hundreds of men on the causeways. The last Aztec ruler, Cuauhtémoc, rallied the defense. But the real killer had already slipped inside the walls. Smallpox, brought by the Europeans, swept through a population with zero immunity. Thousands died, then tens of thousands. By the time Cortés returned with reinforcements and a fleet of small warships built to control the lake, Tenochtitlan was already a city of the dying. The siege lasted 3 months. Cortés cut the causeways, destroyed the aqueducts, and advanced block by block, demolishing buildings as he went. The Aztecs fought with everything they had. But on August 13, 1521, Cuauhtémoc was captured and the city fell. Cortés built Mexico City directly on top of the ruins. What came next was not conquest in the traditional sense. It was erasure. The Spanish dismantled temples, burned codices, banned religious practices, and imposed colonial rule backed by forced labor and Christian conversion. And underneath all of it, disease did what armies never could. The population of central Mexico collapsed from roughly 25 million to under 2 million in less than a century. It was one of the worst demographic catastrophes in human history. But here's the thing about the Aztecs. They refused to disappear completely. Nahuatl is still spoken by nearly 2 million people today. The chocolate you drink, the tomatoes in your kitchen, the avocado on your plate, those are Aztec. And that eagle on the cactus from the old prophecy, it's on the Mexican flag right now. A reminder that Mexico didn't begin with the people who conquered it. It began with the ones who built an empire on an island in a lake against every odd and dared the sun to keep rising.